because the money was being siphoned off by Lazarenko and Tymoshenko, Ukraine at that time, as they have today, ran up a huge gas debt to Gazprom. And by the end of 1996, they owed RAO Gazprom, which was the primary Russian supplier of natural gas, about $200 million. And so they went through the whole crisis with Russia that they've been through a number of times with respect to Ukraine's debt to Russia for the natural gas. Had the money not gone into Lazarenko's pockets, perhaps they may not have had the debt that they had at that time.
So the average citizen pays a direct cost by having to pay bribes, but also a much steeper indirect cost as the state revenue plummets and the ability of the state to provide basic social welfare for the citizens goes down.
No, this isn't something peculiar or special about Ukraine. Until the coming of J. Edgar Hoover, the U.S. government used to be intensely corrupt. What Hoover did was create an FBI which cannot be bribed. If you try to bribe an FBI man, he will agree to take the bribe. He'll film you giving it to him, and then he'll arrest you right after you've handed the money and he has the evidence. Well, there's no one in Ukraine like that, and what Ukraine needs to do is create an operation like the FBI of people who are so dedicated that they cannot be bribed.
Most of the counts relating to UASU were dismissed during the course of the trial because the judge felt that there wasn't enough evidence tying the UESU money to actions of Lazarenko directly.
So that was one of the fraud schemes that we alleged. The counts related to that scheme were dismissed by the judge mid-trial, as I understand it, because he believed that we had not proven a violation of Ukrainian law. He believed that we had not proven that Ukraine had been harmed by Lazarenko's conduct. I disagreed with that then, and I disagree with it now.
Yeah, I think the judge was tough on the prosecution, perhaps appropriately so. As is often the case in these type of trials, the prosecution alleges everything it can, and then what it actually can prove in court turns out to be a lot less. Part of the challenge that the prosecution faced in proving these things was, first of all, the legal environment at the time. The Ukrainian law at the time was in a great state of flux. So being able to prove anything was a violation of the law at a time when the rule of law didn't really exist was tenuous at best.
But one of the problems we had as a matter of proof was that, number one, Yulia Tymoshenko would not talk to us. And number two, we had some mutual legal assistance requests to the Russians because we wanted to talk to the people at RAO Gazprom that were involved, and the Russians refused to cooperate with us and refused to make the witnesses available. They actually summoned her in. She came in with her lawyer and told us that she was invoking the Ukrainian equivalent of a Fifth Amendment privilege and would not submit to an interview.
They also had to rely on Ukrainian witnesses and witnesses from all across, really, the Eastern Europe who could testify to what happens. It wasn't enough to present account sheets to the jury and say, here's this dollar moving to this account, moving to this account. They had to have people describe this.
A huge amount of facts to try to pull together and sort out. Obviously, we had witnesses and testimony and documents from, I think, 30 different countries. So we had all the language problems, the sort of clash of judicial systems, the difficulties of getting evidence from other countries.
San Quentin, home to California's death row. Did she serve time in there? No. Definitely not. Alcatraz, maybe. Not likely. It's been closed for decades. There's the current residence of her former mentor, Pavlo Lazarenko. She's not in there either. Why not? In fact, Yulia was arrested in 2001 in Ukraine and released, then arrested again for corruption. She says it was politically motivated. Oh, those Ukrainian judges. Well, she was released again. So, can we call her an unindicted co-conspirator?
You could characterize her as an unindicted co-conspirator.
Lazarenko and Tymoshenko both ran for the same party ticket in 1998 in Ukrainian parliamentary elections. And since then, Tymoshenko has really been a major political figure in Ukraine, and as such has tried to distance herself from Lazarenko.
So it's not so much that Yulia Tymoshenko has moved from business into politics as that she has been in politics all along, and she is finally succeeding in becoming the chief politician rather than in being somebody who's persuading the politicians to help her become rich.
And there's another reason.
You know, several senior American political figures, including Madeleine Albright, had regular meetings with Yulia Tymoshenko, and we're closely, and we're counting on her to help the Ukraine, you know, in its transition to democracy. So we know that the political interests of the United States government at the highest level probably didn't want Yulia Tymoshenko drawn into the Lazarenko case.
There are some sort of positives. I mean, one thing about Yulia Tymoshenko is that she knows for sure where the bodies are buried, because she buried a fair number of them herself.
So Pavel Lazarenko only became prime minister of the Ukraine because Leonid Kuchma, who came from the same region of Ukraine as he did, and elevated him to that position. Pavel Lazarenko, in turn, played a similar role with Yulia Tymoshenko, who also came from Dnipropetrovsk. When he rose to prime minister, he elevated Yulia Tymoshenko to a position of power and gave her control over Ukraine's gas monopoly.
Remember, Yannick, if in business both parties don't gain, it's not a good transaction.
So there's a very tight, close relationship between all three of these. What's interesting is that Pavel Lazarenko turns against Kuchma, and as a member of the oligarchy begins to try to wrest control of the government from Kuchma's hand. Later, after Pavel Lazarenko is, leaves Ukraine and is on trial in the United States, Yulia Tymoshenko plays a similar role with Kuchma. She goes from being an oligarch and a business leader with a controversial background fraught with corruption allegations to a leading member of the Orange Revolution and a woman championing the rights of the people of Ukraine against the power of the oligarchs and the government.
It was when Yulia Tymoshenko decided to